All right, good morning. Thank you all for coming to the Commission's strategic planning session. As you will notice, I am not Jim Gilmore and I'm not Pat Kelleher. Jim Gilmore had a family situation. His father-in-law passed away last night, so he had to obviously head out and be with his families where he needed to be. So Jim headed out, and Pat's taking a little bit earlier flight. He's got a weather situation in Maine that he wants to try to get ahead of. So I'm going to step in and chair the strategic planning session, the policy board, and the business session to wrap up the Commission's February meeting. So with that, I think we'll jump right into the strategic planning session. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We'll have public comment, and then Deke is going to present the results of the Commissioner survey that was completed over the last couple of weeks by you folks. And then we'll jump into the draft strategic plan that we pulled together between the annual meeting and this meeting. So is there anything else that anyone would suggest that we try to tackle during this workshop? Seeing none, I know we have one individual, Michelle Duval, would like to make public comment prior to jumping into the Commissioner survey results. So, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michelle Duval, currently an independent contractor working out of the great if semi-Arctic Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. I'm helping the council develop their new strategic plan for 2020 to 2024, and I just wanted to come here and update folks sitting around the table on that process. Given the shared management responsibilities of the Commission and the Council, I just wanted to encourage everyone's participation in that. We just launched an online stakeholder survey a couple of weeks ago as one tool to gather feedback on how well the Council has performed under its existing strategic plan, and also to solicit input on priorities for the future. And there's obviously a lot of issues of mutual interest between the Council and the Commission, so I encourage commissioners and stakeholders to participate in that online survey. It'll be open through the end of February, and you can access it from the Council's homepage. If you go to the Mid-Atlantic Council's homepage, About Us, and then click on Strategic Plan, you'll see a link to the survey. My contact information is there, so if anybody has any questions or concerns or suggestions, drop me an email or give me a call, and I'll look forward to hearing folks' input. And that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing your discussion today.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate the comment and the offer to participate in the Mid-Atlantic survey, and good luck staying warm in Pennsylvania. With that, I'll turn it over to Deke. He's going to present the results of the Commissioner survey for this year. So, Deke, ready to go?
Thanks, Bob. All right, the Commissioner Progress Survey was initiated in 2009 to evaluate Commission progress. The 2018 survey was open from January 16th to 29th, 2019, and it includes 15 rating questions and 5 comment questions. So we had 31 commissioners and proxies complete the survey this year. The individual question scores and the averages didn't change drastically from 2017 to 2018. And some important themes from the comment section were also pretty similar to 2017, notably on cooperation, allocation, and climate change. So 4 questions from the 2018 survey scored below a 7, and those were actions reflecting progress towards the Commission's vision, cooperation between commissioners, cooperation with federal partners, and managing rebuilt stocks. And this next slide takes a look at some of the decreases from last year. There were 4 questions for which scores decreased by 5% or more. That was reacting and adapting to new information, confidence that Commission actions reflect progress towards our vision, use of resources on issues within the Commission's control, and comfort with a clear and achievable plan to reach our vision. You can see I've got the score and then the decrease up there. So some of these, for example, have a high score but trended down a little bit. On the next slide, I show the highest performing questions of 2018. These are all usually pretty high, and it's efficient use of Commission resources, the appropriate amount of resources spent on issues within the Commission's control, and the ISFMP and science products. The next slide shows some areas where we improved from 2017 to 2018, and those were tracking the number of stocks where overfishing is no longer occurring as a metric of Commission progress. Cooperation with our federal partners has improved, and ISFMP products saw an increase. All right, on to the comment section. There was a lot of overlap throughout the 5 questions, so I grouped them sort of into 5 different categories. The first being obstacles and areas for improvement. So there we saw climate change and shifting stocks, Commissioner cooperation, willingness to make difficult decisions, crowded meeting week agendas, increased management coordination with law enforcement and council relationships. The next slide shows recommendations for Commissioner improvements, and those included stock assessment training opportunities, Commissioner orientation, and simplified meeting materials. There were also some suggestions to improve outreach and communication with stakeholders, and those included products describing the Commission management process to the public, outreach to the commercial and recreational sectors, and increased collaboration with outside groups. The final slide on comments were the most useful products that the Commission produces. You folks listed meeting materials, summaries, and press releases, the ISFMP and science products, and opportunities to problem solve or confer with other states during meeting weeks. And the most requested new Commission products are performance reviews of past measures, economic and ecological analysis from ASMFC and cooperating agencies, opportunities to support more research money for the states, information on management options used on the Gulf and Pacific coasts, improvement in recreational catch and effort data, and aquaculture research. With that, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deke. Any questions or comments on the survey? Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look at the results, the variations I find are extremely small. And my guess is if we answered this survey 3 times during the year, that it would vary up and down in those kind of margins. So I take it as very positive results. I think, basically all high marks, and I think we need to keep doing it, but it continues to show that almost for the most part that we're doing the right thing and we're on the right track. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Richie. Other comments or questions about the survey results? Obviously, the idea is presenting this now, prior to the discussion on the strategic plan is this information should feed into that strategic plan and make modifications as necessary. Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having answered the survey for years now, anytime I see those 1 to 10 type things, I'm always kind of scratching my head as to, 10 always seems like, wow, that kind of means you couldn't do any better. I'm just wondering if there might be opportunity to look into survey design and see if there might be a way that might get us, because it seems like, as Richie just said, the results are pretty similar every year. Maybe the questions could be worded differently, or I don't know. I mean, it just seems that those type are always a little tricky to figure out when you got 10 is the best, 1 is the worst, and then you're figuring what's the difference between an 8 and a 7, and what does a 3 mean, or whatever.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we struggle at the staff level of consistency is great because you can compare year after year, but should this survey evolve over time and work on different ranges or very high, medium, low, or rather than numbers, some other sort of quantitative or qualitative way of answering those questions. So that's good feedback. Yes, Lauren.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm always interested to know the percentage of commissioners who actually respond to the survey and whether it has changed over the last years. If that data is available, I'd be interested in knowing that.
Yeah, Deke had a slide at the very beginning. This year was about 2/3 of commissioners responded to the survey. So it's gone up and down in a number of years. I don't know. Jess, can you put that slide back up? There it is. So the top bars are the number of responses for the last decade or so. So it's gone from 21 is the low, 39 is the high, 31 this year, kind of right in the middle. We'd love to have 45, but that being a survey, you never get full responses. So, other comments or questions? Yes, David.
A quick point, Mr. Chairman. We still struggle with this issue, I think, of satisfaction, gaining satisfaction, gaining satisfaction from the way we manage rebuilt stocks. And I'm not sure that we shouldn't try to, obviously that's one of the lower scores that people give, and I'm not sure we shouldn't try to ask some other questions to try to get at exactly what the problems are, concerns are that different individuals have.
And that, David, you're right, and that comes up, that score has decreased, meaning people are less satisfied with the way we handle rebuilt stocks over the last little while. So I think that's a fair question. Does anyone have a comment on why they may have scored that relatively low, and on what areas of rebuilt stock management can the Commission in general improve upon? Yes, Adam.
Hopefully my answer to that didn't skew the results too much. But clearly, to myself anyway, and I think to the fishing community, and I'm going to speak specifically towards summer flounder, black sea bass, recreational species, the challenge we have there is that the measures we've enacted over the years have driven regulations to be so precautionary that we now have, even with rebuilt stocks, no way to get back to accessible fisheries anymore. And that remains the challenge, in my opinion, and I've advocated for it over and over and over again, that when we get new information, we need to find some way to get us back to some set of regulations that provide reasonable access, as opposed to just using the regulations that have resulted from precautionary management decisions over the years as the starting point. So from my perspective, that's the biggest area that we can improve on managing rebuilt stocks, is trying to find a way to get back to measures that promote access to the fishery, as opposed to continuing to just use as the baseline the more draconian measures that had evolved during rebuilding.
Thanks, Adam. Other comments? Yes, Roy.
Thank you, Bob. Since these surveys have been going on for 10 years now, I wonder if we could use some statistical analysis of the results to indicate whether there are any trends in individual responses. I mean, we look at the graphs of the responses to a given question, and there's ups and downs. It's difficult to discern trends, but maybe there's some analysis that would be instructive. For instance, if I look at that average score since 2013 that you have up on the board, do I detect a trend downward in the average score? Is that of any meaning or concern? Those are the type of things that may be available to us now that we have 10 years of this survey information. Thank you.
We've got a good time series going, so that's good. Other comments or questions? Yes, David.
I don't have an answer for the point that I'm going to make, but all of us grading our own performance is one way to get at this. But if we went out and somehow could design a survey where the people we're working with, the recreational groups, could somehow weigh in on this, and the commercial people could weigh in, we might find very different results. And as I said, I don't know how you do that. It would be a really tricky thing to do, but you know, if you asked a core group of our constituents, both recreational, commercial, and environmental, to do this, you might get very different results.
I bet we would, yeah, yeah. Other feedback? Yes, John.
I just had a practical question, Bob. Is there any way that when you finish the survey, Deke, that you could print it out? Because I can't remember, like this year, what my answers were last year. So I may have, you know, on the same question where I thought I was giving it the same response, I may have gone up or down, and that may account for some of the variation you see, because what's the difference between a 7 and 8 on this? It's kind of hard to tell.
Deke, you know the tool better than I do.
I think we could explore that under the survey tool. Looking back, since it's anonymous, I don't know if we would be able to go back and find your own specific answers to past years, but we can, I know when you click finish, you're just done, so I take your point, and we can look
Right,
at
that's
that.
what I meant, Deke, was not you finding it, but when I finish, that I could just print it out, so I have a copy of what I did this year that I could refer to next year.
Okay, yeah, I think we can take a look into the SurveyMonkey and see if that's an option.
Good. Any other comments or thoughts? All right, seeing none, you know, we'll go ahead and obviously continue the survey. Hopefully it doesn't take, oh, Maureen, yes.
Hi, in response to your question, thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to your question about how we work on recovered stocks, I wanted to say I agreed with Adam's comments that we feel that a species such as black sea bass, which is recovered and which is plentiful, and yet still some of the states have to struggle with trying to maintain their current recreational management measures, as opposed, you know, and not slipping down to more restricted management measures at a time when the fish are very plentiful.
That's good feedback. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of sentiment and agreement with that around the table. Other comments before we jump into the strategic plan? All right, seeing none, you know, like I was starting to say, we'll continue this survey. I think it does provide some good information, and hopefully it's not a real burden on commissioners to fill out. It's relatively quick, and you know, we can do it in 10 or 15 minutes or so. So we'll keep it going until we hear otherwise. So with that, the draft strategic plan was circulated and is in the briefing materials for the workshop, as well as the business session later today. A bit of history as to how we got where we are. In May 2018, we had a workshop on reviewing the current strategic plan, or the one that ended in 2018, and got some feedback there. A group of us, chairs, the chair and vice chair and previous chairs and myself, went and sequestered ourselves on an island in Maine for 48 hours or so, and came up with some other ideas that were woven into a conversation at the annual meeting in October in New York City. And it was a pretty lengthy conversation, and obviously the commissioners gave a lot of feedback there. And what we've done is taken the feedback and comments from all those different venues and rolled them into this draft strategic plan that will be hopefully effective from 2019 to 2023. Tina took the lead on drafting a lot of this, and you know, she gets a lot of the credit for the current document. So with that, I'll quickly go through what's in here. Stop me at any time if you want to talk about something. We're going to quickly get to a decision point at the vision. There's two different options in here, so I will, you know, once we get there, I'll pause, and then we can see if there's an agreement or a majority that prefers one of the options over another, and then we'll bring that recommendation to the business session later today. So with that, the overall format of the document is very similar to what it was in the past. The introduction is somewhat consistent with what was in the past, just updated a little bit to make it contemporary, but overall the same ideas are there. That, you know, the commission is obviously has the responsibility of managing and safeguarding public trust resources, and you know, and it goes through the background of the Atlantic Coastal Act, Striped Bass Act, and those sorts of things. The document then reiterates the mission, which is from the Compact of 1942. That's not really something that's up for negotiation unless you guys want to redo the Compact, which I don't think we do. And we have restated the mission over time to make it more modern, and that's included in on page 2, sort of the middle of the page. And then the document goes into the vision. As I mentioned, this is a first decision point. There are 2 different kind of perspectives that were provided at the annual meeting. One is captured in the first vision, or one thing that was apparently consistent or seemed fairly consistent was the idea that sustainability and cooperation are the underpinnings for the next 5 years of ASMFC. And how do we weave both of those ideas into one vision statement? So there's 2 options. Sustainable and cooperative management of Atlantic coastal fisheries is the first option. The second option is cooperative management of sustainable Atlantic coastal fisheries. So same idea, just worded a little bit differently. I don't know if there's anyone that has a preference of the 2. They say similar things, but they're worded a little bit differently. So I'll pause here. Is there a strong preference for either one of these versions? Not seeing any. Maureen.
Thank you. I like the first one better.
All right, there's a vote or nod for the first one. Anyone have a problem with the first one if we use that? It's very similar to what we had in the past. It just adds the words "and cooperative" to the previous vision that we had. So it just highlights the need for cooperation to get everything done that the Commission wants to do. All right, then version 1, sustainable and cooperative management of Atlantic coastal fisheries, will be the draft vision we bring forward to the business session later today. One of the next section is driving forces, and this is where the significant rewriting occurred, and this is where a lot of the conversations at the meeting we had in Maine, as well as the annual meeting in New York. So I'll quickly go through the driving forces, and these are the outside factors that are going to influence what happens at the Commission and what really drives what the states do over the next 5 years. There's a lot of pushing and pulling from the outside world that's going to change how we operate and how this body considers their management decisions. So the first one is changing ocean conditions. This appears to be sort of the underpinning of everything that's going on. It's affecting all dimensions of ASMFC and all fisheries management up and down the East Coast. And the verbiage highlights a number of species: northern shrimp, southern New England lobster, cobia, black sea bass, summer flounder, which are some of the probably highest profile species that have moved and been impacted by climate change. And it also brings into to question the viability of some of the species is compromised, and how does the Commission handle species like northern shrimp where the viability is compromised? And the ideas included here that we should focus on things we can control. Sort of, if no matter what management action the Commission takes on northern shrimp, it's been moratorium for 4+ years now, so that stock's kind of left on its own to do what it can do, and hopefully the conditions will be favorable for a rebound. But outside of that rebound, there's not much we can do. So the Commission should, focus resources on things that they can affect and things that are, we're able to affect in the near future, and make them priorities and put the resources toward those issues. So that's changing ocean conditions. The second one is allocation. Again, this is somewhat driven by the first one, in that species are moving in different areas. They're distributed differently up and down the coast than they have been historically. For better or for worse, some of the historic periods that we use to allocate fisheries are getting farther and farther behind us. I'm not saying they're wrong; they're just more farther back in the rearview mirror. So, this section contemplates the need to consider reallocation of some of these species. It's not forcing reallocation, but that will be some of the toughest decisions that a group of states will have to deal with over the next 5 years. You guys are going to come together, vote on moving species around, which may mean changing quotas in your state up or down. and it's hard to vote in favor of moving down in certain areas. So, this obviously highlights that as one of the things that's going to drive a lot of decisions here at the Commission in the near future. Next driving force is science as a foundation. This is similar. A similar one was in the previous document. It just highlights the importance of fishery-dependent, fishery-independent data, the ACCSP program, and the need to base the Commission's management decisions on science as, the science should be the foundation of everything that happens at the Commission. And, this just highlights the importance of that, as well as some of the programs that are coming online to collect that data, warehouse that data, and access that data through ACCSP. But data collection is expensive, and this recognizes that as well. The next one, ecosystem functions. This is, forage issues and other things that we've been wrestling with. Obviously, the previous meeting that we just had highlights a lot of the importance of the ecological services of menhaden and other forage species, but it also, takes into account the predatory demands of some of the other species we're trying to rebuild, and there's trade-offs between those two as well. The next driving force, competing ocean uses. The ocean is 70% of the world, but it's a busy place right now, and there's competing issues of commercial wreck issues, renewable energy. The wind farms are obviously a critical issue. Aquaculture is ramping up. There's a push for and an interest in offshore oil exploration, military, habitat restoration. All these other things are competing for the finite spaces out in the ocean, and there seems to be a limited number of spaces that we all want to be in at the same time. So how do we wrestle with those competing needs? If you were at the lobster meeting earlier this week, protected species is obviously on the forefront of your thoughts. We're trying to how do you balance out really important and critical protected resources issues such as the Atlantic right whale issue, where you only have 400 and some animals left, but you also have a $1 billion+ lobster industry that's dependent on continuing that fishery. And how do you balance those trade-offs? And that's going to be a driving force for the Commission in the near future. And the last one is the increased cooperation and collaboration between the states and our other partners and the federal partners. And really, all the other driving forces lead up to the need for this, which highlights, the world's more complex, the driving forces are more complex, and we need to, the only way we're going to be able to grapple with those is increased cooperation and collaboration among the states, among you folks, and among our federal partners. So that just highlights the need for greater cooperation, and without that greater cooperation, the Commission process and the management process up and down the coast really isn't going to work as smoothly as it can, and we're going to have a lot of friction amongst the states. So those are the driving forces. I'll stop there. Any comments or other driving forces or edits within these that we should consider? Yes, Stephen Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. In the changing ocean conditions, I'd like to see a little change where down about midway through the paragraph where it says conditions have shifted species distribution. I think in some cases it has expanded or shifted species distributions. I mean, we still see the same species. It's just maybe the biomass has moved farther north, or the distribution of the species themselves have moved farther north.
That's a good point. Justin.
Thank you. So I would say overall I really like this section. I think it lays out all the issues facing the Commission really well, and the comment I wanted to make was that I appreciate the emphasis on changing ocean conditions and allocation. I'll echo some of the comments made by my colleagues from New York and New Jersey. I think it's a mistake to think that the ocean has ever been static. It's always been a dynamic environment. Fisheries resources have probably always been moving around, but it's the pace that I think right now is really the problem. The ocean's changing very rapidly, and it's outpacing sort of the rate at which we can deal with it. I do take a little bit of issue with the third sentence down in changing ocean conditions, which says that the distribution and productivity of fishery stocks are often changing at a rate faster than fishery science and management can keep pace with. I think, for sure, fishery science and management maybe are both lagging a little bit behind the rate of change, but I think fishery science is clearly in second place and has probably lapped management. I think there's a lot of good science out there showing what's happening in our ocean as a result of climate change and shifting distributions. I think it's really management that's lagging and not keeping up with the science. So I think there's a little bit of a false equivalency there, suggesting that we don't have the level of scientific understanding of what's going on that we actually do. I think the problem has been the reluctance or inability of interstate management bodies to act on that scientific knowledge.
That's a good point. We can make that change pretty easily. Thank you. And the next hand was Adam.
Thank you very much and appreciate the efforts here. Again, on changing ocean conditions, following up on Steve's point, I think some of the debate we've heard this week and in recent months and actually years from the Commission on a couple of issues, summer flounder, commercial reallocation in particular. Earlier this week we heard about concerns about black sea bass. Is this purely a shift, or is it a contributing factor is also expansion? So I would agree with the comment about in the sentence about have shifted species distributions, changing that. I would offer as a suggested change, instead of saying have shifted species distributions, I would reword that to have contributed to changing species distributions, something for consideration. And then building on that theme, again, given the fact that we're multiple years into the summer flounder reallocation discussion, and we still haven't come to a consensus as to whether or not we do need to reallocate and to what magnitude we need to. In the following sentence, where we have where shifts are occurring, the Commission will need to reconsider. I would offer that we change that to the Commission may need to reconsider, just so that we don't have people looking at this and saying, well, your strategic plan said you would do it. We may need to if the situation warrants.
Thank you. Yes, Doug.
Thank you, Bob. I have a little bit of a different take on Justin's comments. I agree that our science is of very good quality, and I think they provide good information for us to manage with, and I agree with you that it may be the management that may be lagging. But I also see that with the speed at which some changes are occurring, we only get stock assessments or updates every 3 years. And in a fairly static environment, that's fine. But what we're seeing is changes going from very high levels of abundance, and I'll give Atlantic herring as an example, to 3 years later, we get an assessment that says that we're about ready to be overfished, and our abundance levels are 3/4, are 75 or 25% of what they were 3 years before, according to that assessment. So I would tend to say that that statement is accurate, that it's faster than we have the resources. What we should ideally have when things are moving so quick is annual updates, but we don't have the resources to do it. So I would suggest that from my perspective, that sentence could remain the same, not that just because of the speed at which the things are changing and the fact that we don't have the ability to do regular updates on most of our species.
Great, thank you, Doug. Other comments on driving forces? Do we miss anything? All right, seeing none, we can, at the end of this conversation, we'll have to decide, I think we had a number of great comments there and feedback on modifications. The question will be, is this document ready for prime time? Is it ready to go to the business session, the full commission later today for approval? Or do you want to have staff go back, rework it, and bring it back again for another review at the May meeting? And there's, not a lot of urgency, but it's up to the group how you want to proceed. So keep that in the back of your mind. So moving on to the goals and objectives. Overall, the goals are fairly consistent with what was included in the past. I'll just quickly go through them. We did add goal number 3, which I'll comment in a minute. But overall, there's the same general categories of things that we need to work on at the commission. And the objectives are tweaked a bit to be more contemporary, but overall, they're similar. And which is, a number of these things are the underpinnings and things that the commission does. So that it makes sense they didn't change a whole lot. First one, rebuild, maintain, fairly allocate, and promote Atlantic coastal fisheries. This is generally the fish management portion of what we do, and through the ISFMP and the FMPs for the 27 species at the commission. So that one, again, not a lot of changes there. Number 2, provide sound, actionable science to promote, to support informed management actions. We reworded that one a little bit, but it's the same idea. This is a science stock assessment information that we have that forms the underpinnings of hopefully the commission's decisions. Goal number 3 is produce dependable and timely marine fishery statistics for Atlantic coast fisheries. This is ACCSP in general. That ACCSP was not included in the last 5-year strategic plan because it was its own separate entity that was just sort of administratively housed in ASMFC. Now they're one of the departments within ASMFC. So we rolled them in as sort of a goal number 3 because it is a data collection, data warehousing, data management is a big project for the commission. In fact, that's of the staff members we have, that's the largest department right now is data management, data collection. So goal number 3, that is relatively new language, but it does capture the idea of what ACCSP does and working through the partnership that it is. Goal 4, protect and enhance fish habitat and ecosystem health through partnerships and education. This is the ASMFC habitat program as well as the ACFIP program, the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership. This was updated a little bit since ACFIP was sort of in the primary stages, early stages back 5 years ago. So it really, it highlights the importance of the Atlantic Coastal Partnership and details some of the activities that group will have. Goal number 5, promote compliance with fishery management plans to ensure sustainable use of Atlantic coast fisheries. This is essentially the law enforcement activities that the commission has. Again, very similar language, very minor changes within that text. Strengthen stakeholder and public support for the commission. This is the outreach efforts that the commission does to highlight all of its actions and the science that's produced and all the other activities. Goal 7, advance commission and member states' priorities through proactive legislative policy agenda. This is our Capitol Hill activities and reaching out to our elected officials at the state and federal levels to help with what we do and highlight the importance of what we do and garner their support as much as possible. And goal 8, ensure the fiscal stability and efficient administration of the commission. This is all the behind the scenes administrative activity that keeps the money flowing, the lights on, the meetings planned, staff paid, and all the other details that happen at the commission. And this is obviously a growing area with APIS and ACCSP and the other grants that we're helping NOAA Fisheries with right now, and it's the overall commission budget has grown a lot in the past 5 years. So the wording here is fairly consistent because the work's consistent, but there's just a lot more of it. So those are the goals. Happy to answer any questions on those if there are any, or suggested changes to any of the 8 goals and the objectives. Yes, John.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I was just curious, have any new goals been added since the last one, or has there been really any change to the goals, or are they all pretty much the same?
Pretty much the same. The only new one is the ACCSP one, which is now goal 3. There were only 7 goals in the last document. Now there are 8, but the 7 that move forward are pretty much the same. Yes, David.
In terms, I'm not suggesting changing anything. It's just for my own edification. On goal 5, we've got this issue of evaluate the effectiveness of law enforcement programs. And I guess, could you remind me, have we ever done a comprehensive, or when was the last comprehensive evaluation of the enforcement programs? Because it's one of the, and this is a pet peeve of mine, that, it's a critical component of our programs, and to what extent are we applying the same enforcement efforts and resources in the different jurisdictions? So have we done a comprehensive?
We haven't done a comprehensive review. We've done, subject specific, odds and ends here and there. Striped bass in the EEZ was a big issue for a while, and we worked with Coast Guard to enforce that. And so there are issue specific projects that the Law Enforcement Committee tackles, but we haven't really done a comprehensive thing. Obviously, offshore lobster enforcement is something that's in the background now that we're trying to tackle. But across the board, how are things working? How are folks complying? We haven't really looked into that. And and part of that is, what do the law enforcement resources at the state levels look like? I think number of officers on the water in some states, many states have gone down recently, which obviously is trouble. But compliance really is driven by developing regulations that the fishermen buy into. So if they don't buy into the regulations, the enforcement part gets a lot harder. So it's a complex question, but I agree we could do more of that and get a better handle on how we're doing as far as keeping folks playing by the rules. Yes, David.
It just comes up in management discussions with the constituents. Some of them have this biased view that some states do a good job of doing it, and therefore they're kind of penalizing their own constituents, and other states aren't necessarily aggressive. If we could figure out some way to do that, I think it'd be useful. Evaluate the.
Yeah, it sounds like a good project. I can work with Mark Robson, and we can brainstorm a little bit and figure out how we can tackle something like that. Other comments? I had Adam, and then Lauren, and then Jason.
Under Goal 1, the last sentence of the text talks about the Commission is committed to ending overfishing and working to rebuild overfished, depleted Atlantic coast fish stocks. And then we have a bullet point objective that I think supports that statement. The next to the last one, evaluate progress towards rebuilding fisheries. The second part of that last sentence talks about while promoting sustainable harvest of and access to rebuilt fisheries. We just heard in the Commissioner survey that there remains a level of dissatisfaction with access to those rebuilt stocks and how we manage them. So I would be interested in seeing a bulleted objective that speaks directly towards us as a body working towards that goal. Unfortunately, I don't have a specific idea to offer outside of rewording perhaps that last sentence of the text in the goal and turning it into a bullet point. I don't know if there was any conversation about it during the time when you were putting this together, but I would be very interested in seeing a specific objective that relates to that access to rebuilt resources that we've highlighted earlier.
Thank you, Adam. That's a good comment. We did not have any specific conversations about that as we were drafting this. The bullets there, the objectives there, are mostly rolled over from the previous one, so that's a fair point. Any other comments? I had Lauren, and then up here.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to express my appreciation and support for the comment regarding law enforcement. It's a part of the equation that I've always been especially interested in. I know what's happening on Pennsylvania waters relating to water law enforcement, but my knowledge level plunges off then as I consider what's going on up and down the coast. So that kind of information would be very helpful to me, and I certainly encourage that.
Great, thank you. We can work on that. Jay, and then Eric, do you have your hand up? No, just Jay.
Thank you. So, reading through this, Goal 1, the kind of the bolded section there caught my eye, and it was specifically the word promote. So the tail end of that is and promote Atlantic coast fisheries. And so I read that, and then I was kind of looking through the text, trying to figure out what that meant. And so the first thing that popped into my head when I read it, because this is something that's going on in Rhode Island, is, are we promoting like eat local seafood and things like that? So I'm wondering so as I read through, what I think happened is there's a missing word maybe, and it should say something like promote sustainable Atlantic coastal fisheries or something like that, just to define what exactly it is that we're promoting. Otherwise, well, there's no definition of that in the text, and so I've offered what I think might be a solution, but if you meant something else, then I just would like to hear what that is.
No, I think you're right on with that comment. The Commission hasn't yet gone down the road of promoting local seafood and you know, advertising campaign that says buy striped bass or whatever it is. So, and I don't envision that happening necessarily unless you guys want to. But I think, yeah, the sustainability and promoting the you know, quality fisheries along the coast is what we're trying to do. So that's good feedback. We can add that word. Yes, Doug?
Just to that point, I think where the word promote comes out of is the original mission of the compact. It's mentioned at least twice in the compact. Promotion and protection of fisheries, promote the better utilization of fisheries, marine shell, and anadromous. So that's where I always thought when we put together that goal years ago, where we drew that word promote. Now maybe we can modify it as Jay had suggested, and that may get at things, but.
All right, thanks, Doug. Yes, Maureen?
Thank you. The last sentence of goal number 1 does stress, actually both points have been brought up by members of the board. It states, the last phrase is, working to rebuild overfished or depleted Atlantic coast fish stocks while promoting sustainable harvest of and access to rebuilt fisheries. So that does address our point of concern of how we're going to use rebuilt fisheries, and it does mention that we are promoting sustainable harvest.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I don't know, the more I read that sentence, I've read it a few times while we're sitting here, I'm worried it may be saying that we're going to, you know, work to rebuild depleted stocks, but in another part of the document we say things like northern shrimp, southern New England lobster, and other areas we may want to put a little bit less resource and less effort into rebuilding those stocks if there's environmental conditions that preclude those stocks from rebuilding. So I'm not sure if I have a wording thing, or maybe I'm overanalyzing that, but maybe we have a bit of an internal conflict with ourselves to, you know, we want to prioritize things that we can affect, where we can affect change, but we also want to rebuild stocks where we may not have a lot of control. So may need to think about that one a little bit. David Blazer.
Thanks, Bob. This is excellent. I really appreciate. I think this is well done. I do have one question, and I'm trying to figure out. We talk about risk and limitations of our understanding related to the scientific information that we get. You know, we heard a little bit about it this morning with the bay cap. You look at the spot stock assessment that, you know, the peer review said not to use it for management purposes. So I was wondering if maybe in goal 2, at some point in there, we make a statement about that the scientific information, you know, we use sound technical advice, but we also understand or we get a better understanding of the risk and limitations of our scientific information as we use it for management. So I know we've talked about risk a lot, and it's not absolute, you know, the science that we get. It's not, this isn't rocket science, it's much harder. So there might be good to have a statement in here that, you know, that we get information or an understanding of the risk and the limitations of the information that we get.
I think that's good feedback, and you know, if only we had somebody working on risk and uncertainty, Jay. No, yeah, Jay's put a lot of time and a lot of thought into that, as well as the working group that he's on. So I think we can work to capture another bullet, probably under goal 2, about risk and uncertainty and understanding the you know, that in the scientific advice. Yes, Dan.
Thanks, Bob. One of the issues that I brought up in the past has to do with sort of the enhancing the free flow of seafood among the partners. So later this month, we're going to public hearing to change our regulations to allow some of the Maryland fish to come into our markets year-round. instead of just in a tiny window. And I think the Commission needs to do a better job at sort of addressing the seafood issues and some of the sort of the historic blocks on commerce that might sort of reside in each state's or jurisdiction's antiquated laws. And so I think that's something that we've been remiss in, and I think it belongs probably in goal number 1 in terms of promoting Atlantic Coast fisheries. Everybody wants to, promote Massachusetts seafood or Rhode Island seafood, but the fact is we manage cooperatively here, and it's a reach to say, well, those Maryland fish aren't welcome in our markets because we're all managing this together. So I think that's an area we need to strengthen this.
Thanks, Dan. I think New York's grappling with some of those same ideas, and Maryland fish as well. So, yeah, I think that's something we can capture here. Is there a hand over here? Roy, was that you?
Thank you, Bob. In thinking about the sentence that you agonized over concerning working to rebuild depleted Atlantic Coast fisheries, perhaps what we should be working towards is to increase our understanding of the drivers for depleted fisheries, because it's my perception that there's frustration on the part of the public with regard to depleted species like winter flounder, weakfish, and others that seem to be beyond our control and whose situation has not changed for a number of years. But perhaps we would be wise to, even if it's theory, to share what we know about these depleted species and what we think are the drivers for these depleted species, even if the means to reverse that depletion are beyond our purview. And so we let our constituents and the public know what we think is going on. Thank you.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think, highlighting some of the roadblocks to rebuilding maybe, at times the Commission receives negative press for not rebuilding stocks and not being aggressive enough and not having the results that folks would like to see, but there's a myriad of reasons why that is, and maybe, sort of being able to characterize those a little bit better would be helpful. That makes sense. I saw another hand. Bill.
Bob, goal number 7, a proactive legislative policy agenda on behalf of the states. That's something that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has as one of their principal focuses, and for a lot of the same pieces of legislation. So I was wondering, historically, how is this group, not suggesting anything needs to be changed in the plan, but historically, how has this group collaborated with AFWA, and do you see any opportunities for increased collaboration going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I wish Robert Boyles was still in the room. A number of individual commissioners, yourself and others, have been very active in AFWA over the years. Staff has been sort of hit and miss at times, and mostly it's a bandwidth issue of where we can be and how many meetings we can attend and those sorts of things. But I know Robert's been to a lot. I'm glad, Robert, you're back talking AFWA. I was saying individual commissioners and individual folks have been very engaged in AFWA, but the Commission as a whole has not. I've attended a meeting or two in my tenure here of 20 years. So, but I do agree that these issues and the AFWA's ability to, bring together a lot of important agencies and groups is important, and there probably is room to increase our engagement in AFWA for sure. And I don't know if it's done through individuals or if it's done through staff or exactly the best way to do it. And folks that are engaged in AFWA probably have a better sense of that than I do for sure.
Yeah, if I would suggest that there is probably opportunity, but not necessarily in large meeting format, but collaboration on specific legislative agendas. And I think they're, as an organization, very much geared up to facilitate that. They keep, all of their staff are budgeted such that they can do government affairs work. They're very good at getting state representatives in front of legislatures with time on hearings, et cetera. So I think there is some opportunity going forward.
Yeah, thank you. It makes a lot of sense. I don't know, Robert, do you feel a similar way?
Absolutely. And, there is an Ocean Resources Policy Committee at AFWA I've been involved with for a while. And I think it's important, we come together to talk about regulatory and management issues, but AFWA provides an opportunity for us to speak to perhaps broader policy issues beyond fisheries management, but issues in which we have a great deal of interest. So I'd certainly encourage us, to the degree that time and resources allow, individually or collectively, to engage with them.
Thank you. Yeah, DEEC does monitor kind of a lot of their activities, and we know what they're up to. It doesn't mean we're engaged in those sorts of things, but we're keeping an eye on it. So I think that's good feedback that DEEC and I can figure out a strategy to engage and weave our priorities in with theirs a little bit better. Other thoughts on the goals and objectives? Yes, John.
Yeah, Bob, since the goals and objectives haven't changed, I'll admit that, I look at these strategic plans pretty much when they're up for renewal and all. How often does the plan get used during the 5 years? How often is it referred to? Because frankly, I don't hear it mentioned much in the years between it being renewed. So how exactly, and the fact that the goals are the same, this will be 10 years with the same goals. How do we use this in?
We at staff use it at least once a year when we do our annual action plans. This is kind of what gives us the structure for the annual action plans and how we divide up our tasks and highlight those. And we've gotten a little bit away from that in the last year by implementing high priority and low priority species. But it may be almost a question for the group. How often do others around the table look back at this document and reference it and let this sort of serve as your strategic foundation for when you come to these meetings and how you make decisions and those sorts of things. And we frankly had that conversation early on in this renewal. Is this really a valuable document, or do we do it every 5 years, put it on a shelf, it gets dusty, we dust it off and look at it in the next 4.5 years before we're ready to renew it, and then we do it. So I think that's a valuable comment. What we're trying to do through the annual action plan is make that a little bit more than annual and have some, projects that stretch 2 or 3 years, highlight that. So there's kind of this merging of multi-year action plans with this bit larger sort of 5-year strategic plan. And so it's kind of a moving target, but we're trying to strike a better balance between just 1-year snapshot and 5-year dusty document on a shelf through our action plan. So it's a valid comment. Yes, Doug?
Well, yeah, I see that even if each commissioner is not pulling this off the shelf at every meeting, I see the value of it, and I also see the value of the vision. Us all knowing what that vision is. I mean, and I think it's good for the staff to use it in the framework of the action plan. I think that's the very sound part of this. I also commend the staff in rewriting this into something that is a little bit simpler, short, because I think the previous one was 20 some odd pages long before this got written. Is that correct, or?
It's been the length of the one that ended in 2018 and this one are similar. The 10 years ago is when we really
10 years ago was
pretty good. Yeah.
But I do appreciate the way this one's written. It seems to be a little bit simpler and easier to read and gets at the point of this is our goal and these are a few of the guiding objectives behind it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. One of the things I was going to bring up here as we wrap this up is the commissioner values, right, Tina? We took out the commissioner values in this version. So, normally I said, no, commissioner values are in there. We never reference those, but then Robert referenced those about 5 times this morning. So, I don't know. Maybe we need to put them back in. But we'll put those up on the screen here in a second, and you guys can decide if you want us just to cut and paste them back in this document or not. And then John has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I didn't mean to infer that there's no value in having the plan. I just meant in terms of do we do it every 5 years, or do we do it when something comes up that would require us to take a look at this and see if we should update the plan in some way? Because as you said, with the annual plans, the action plans have been changed based on changing conditions here, and maybe the arbitrary 5 years is not something we need to have as part of this.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you know, there's nothing that precludes the commission from modifying a 5-year plan during that 5-year window either, you know, if we need to modify it more frequently. But if we think things are static enough and aren't going to change, maybe we can make this, you know, take the dates off of it altogether if we want it. So it's up to the group. With that said, up on the screen right now are the values that this is a section that was cut out to help with kind of readability and sort of function of the document. I'm not sure. So Robert, I think you were out of the room. I mentioned we cut values out of the document, but you referenced them a bunch this morning. So maybe we need them more than we thought we did. So, you know, what's the general sense? Should we add these back in, or do they not add a whole lot to our plan? Robert, do you have a comment? Or?
As you all know from an hour ago, I like them, but I certainly understand. You know, brevity is the soul of wit. So if these things can be implied or inferred by the reader, then I'm fine with taking them out. I'm not going to say that I won't need to reference them. Someone won't need to reference them, you know, in the future. But I think in many regards, this is part of the culture of the commission. I think it's helpful to have those documented somewhere, but again, recognize that we want the document to be readable. So I could go either way.
Well, you know, if the folks may reference them, or there may be, you know, some insight as to, you know, how commissioners, you know, engage in this process, and those provide some guidance or direction. Maybe, you know, simple to cut them and put them back in, cut and paste them back in. Dan?
If they didn't go into the strategic plan, would they reside someplace else in the commission's, you know,
this is kind of the only document that we have that captures sort of the cultural and you know, big picture ideas of the commission.
Then I suggest you bring them back, you retain them.
Easy enough, we can do that. Any objection to weaving these back in? So Robert has something to reference when we have a difficult decision in front of us. All right. So I think that went a little long, but I think that's the summary of this document. What is you know, this is sort of a non-decisional workshop, but what's the will of the group? Is this ready for prime time, or would you like us to go back and incorporate some of these edits? We got quite a few suggestions. And we can bring an updated version back at the May meeting, or we can, you know, just move this document with the edits forward to the business session today and have that approved. What are your thoughts? What's the pleasure of the group? Jason?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of good discussion. So I guess I don't know if there's some compelling reason that we should dispense with this, other than it would tick something off the to-do list. But I'd love to. I, in particular, liked what David Blazer offered, and a couple of the other things were great, too. So I think, you know, you've had specific people kind of offer things. I think people are engaged. So maybe kick it back out for another round, and you could poke the people that were talking at the meeting to kind of get them to focus in on it and bring it back in May.
Any objection to doing that? Rewrite, you know, weaving in the comments and bringing this back in a couple of months. Yes, Doug?
No objection. I think that's a good idea. One thing that I might suggest, if possible, is that when you bring it back to us, you highlight the changes that were suggested here and where we made the changes in this, just so that we're all aware of the changes that were made.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll track changes or some other way of letting folks know, highlight them, that you don't have to read a lot of pages to find 6 or 8 new sentences. So, good. We'll do that. Any other thoughts for strategic planning while we have the workshop? All right. Seeing none, Tina and I and staff will rework this, and we'll get it brought back to you at the May meeting. We'll probably just go straight to the business session and not have another workshop at the May meeting, just for efficiency. All right, with that said, let's take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll start the policy board, if that works for everybody.